living and dying. And that's exactly what they tend to be. You ever notice the logic in so many of the stanzas in our hymnal? So many of the hymns of the faith have 3 stanzas. They might have a 4th, but come on, everyone has one, no one ever sings. We all know that. Okay, anyway, 3 stanzas, and if you look at so many of the songs in the hymnal, those 3 stanzas take the same concept: past, present, future. With a past stanza being about when we got saved, how God saved us, a present stanza which is about our daily struggles and our victory every day, and then a final stanza which is about going home to heaven later on. Life is about past, present, and future. And as Christians, we live in all 3. We never get over the past when God saved us. At the same time, we're not solely focused on the past and when God saved us. We're focusing on how God is blessing us here and now and what we're doing for God. And simultaneously, we're living in the future, looking forward to going home and going to heaven. Here's an interesting question. Old churches tend to have cemeteries next to them. Now, you don't see that with any new church. Any church built since such and such a year, you're not going to see a cemetery. But back in the day, churches used to always have a cemetery right there next to the church. So here's an interesting question. Is that good? Is that a good idea? Is that a good thing to have a cemetery right next to the church? Now, logistically, it's a terrible idea. Logistically, it's a bad idea. Earthly, it's a bad idea. Why? Because you can't ever do anything. One time, we visited a Christian school, and the weird thing about this Christian school is that there were really old tombstones just throughout the campus in awkward places throughout the, like for example, in walking from the cafeteria to the classroom, right there in the middle of the complex were these tombstones. Why are they there? Because you can't move them, because you can't do anything with that land once it's a cemetery. So I understand logistically, there's good reason to not do that. But spiritually, I think it's a wonderful thing. You know why? Because church is about that too. I know someone might say, oh, that's so morbid. We don't want to go to church and think about death. Yeah, you do. That's exactly what you want to do. Not exclusively, but yes, that's something you want to do. You do want to go to church and have church do both. Help you look more forward to dying and simultaneously helping you look more forward to today and tomorrow as well. Because Christ gives us real victory over both. And therefore we are about both. Christ gives us victory over life here, now, today, and for the next X number of years, and death. You know, here's the thing about death. Not thinking about death used to be impossible, because it used to be the case in human civilization. People died all the time. People died young. People died at all ages. You truly got this sense that any day could be your last day. You truly had this sense, and I know it's still technically true, but it was just even more true back then, that at any age, and no matter how healthy you are, you could get sick and die. And so just not being conscious of death was really an impossibility. Today, it's more possible to go throughout the majority of your time on a daily basis just not thinking about death. But to seek God. It causes us to serve God. How many people have been saved either because they lost a loved one, and the loss of that loved one broke them and brought them to Christ? Maybe a desire to see that loved one again in heaven was a catalyst, or got them thinking about simply their own mortality, and therefore they ended up coming to Christ. How many people have gotten saved either because of the death of a loved one or have gotten saved because they were nearing death themselves? Regardless of whether or not they ended up dying or ended up getting better, either way, they were approaching death, and that was exactly the circumstance God used to bring that individual to Christ. And so you see, for the lost, I'm not talking about for the saved, but for the lost, fear of death is a wonderful friend. Because for the lost, again, not for the saved, but for the lost, fear of death is a friend who brings you to Christ. Now, when it comes to the Christian, we don't fear death, obviously. We don't want to fear death. It is our goal to not be afraid of death. It is our goal to be possible, sure. But number one, as long as your consciousness of death is your motivation to be doing things in the present, rather than being your motivation to not do things in the present, then it's an absolute wonderful good. However, that being said, it would be possible for a Christian to look so forward to heaven that he's not taken any time to enjoy life or live life to its fullest or serve God in this life. But that's not most Christians' problem. Most Christians' problem is the opposite: enjoying life to the exclusion of looking forward to going to heaven. So heavenly minded that you're no earthly good. It may be technically possible, but it's just not most Christians' issue. Most Christians have the opposite issue. They're not heavenly minded at all. For the Apostle Paul, yes, he was heavenly minded, and that is what drove him to live and serve and do. For Paul, his greatest motivation in life is what he would experience after his life here on earth. Okay, for example, the verses we looked at this morning of chapter 4, verses 17 and 18. Verse 17, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. See, for the Christian, it is far better to live a painful, challenging life on earth, but then get to look more forward to heaven, than it is to have a comfortable life on earth and not look forward to heaven. If you are serving God, then the thought of heaven is a wind at your back pushing you forward. But if you're serving the world, if you're living for the world, well, then the thought of heaven is only getting in your way. Verse 18 in this morning's text of chapter 4, he wrote, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Paul's consciousness of the hereafter was the very fuel in his gas tank that drove him to keep going. Almost anything that we do that is not of eternal consequence is not worth doing, which doesn't mean that we never have fun, but it means life is not about fun. The Apostle Paul had very little fun. I mean, I'm sure he had some fun mixed in with whatever he did, but fun was never his point. In that sense, he had very little fun. But nevertheless, his life was so incredibly meaningful and satisfying, and the man died with confidence. Living for heaven now is the very thing, looking forward to death, being conscious of death, looking forward to heaven, is the very thing that will make your life meaningful and satisfying and will allow you to die with confidence. So in the first 8 verses of chapter 5, in the hearts of at least modern Christians, when we think about going home to heaven, dying, here are the things we tend to think of. Number one, And this one is the greatest. This one is the most important, as Paul is going to say so in verse 8. That is seeing Christ. So that is the most important thing. But there's other more specific aspects to that he's going to get into. But number one is the most important thing, seeing Christ. Number two, seeing our loved ones. That's not emphasized here whatsoever. It's not even mentioned here. Number three, the wonders of heaven. Okay, that's not mentioned here at all. But the aspect that we don't emphasize as much as Paul did is our future resurrection body. Paul refers to our time, the time coming save for the rapture, the time that has come for all the Christians who have died already, and the time coming for you and I, save for the rapture, our time as disembodied spirits. I mean, that's what any Christian who has died, any Christian at the cemetery, that's what they are, a disembodied spirit. Body stays here, spirit goes home to heaven. And Paul refers to our time as disembodied spirits as being, quote, a time of nakedness in verse number 3. If we die before the rapture, then even though, yes, we're going to see Christ, that is the best, that is the most important thing. And yet, even still, we will long for the day, we will still long for the day in which our soul will once again be clothed with a physical body. Here's a way to think of it. At first we shall be with Christ, but then we shall be like Christ. Number one, the next body is the best. The next body is the best. Verse 1, for we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. So first Paul says that you and I, quote, know, K-N-O-W, know that we have bodies to look forward. How do we know that? The resurrection of the believer is taught throughout both testaments. And Paul makes an exhaustive case back in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that without our resurrection, Christ has not risen either. In other words, if Christians don't have a resurrection future, then we have no future at all, because the gospel stands or falls with our resurrection. Now, but still an interesting question is why he chooses to use the word if. Does that seem a little odd? Why does he say if? I mean, isn't death inevitable? Why does he use the word if? Isn't death inevitable? The answer is no, it is not. Some Christians are going to get their resurrected bodies without dying. As a matter of fact, they, at the rapture, they will get their resurrected bodies even right before or virtually as they see Christ. 1 Corinthians 15:51. Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, meaning we ain't all going to die. But even though some will die and some won't, we shall all be changed. So Paul is saying that his earthly tent might, just maybe, will never, quote, dissolve, but that even if it does, that's okay. Because even if it does, he still has a heavenly body to look forward to. Now, the word translated here as, quote, house in the King James Version, the Greek word, it literally has the idea of a tent. And Paul is saying that our body, as it is now, is like a tent in which our soul is residing. Ever gone camping? Ever stayed in a tent? Fun, right? Oh, what a fun, wonderful adventure it is to rough it and live in a tent. It's so much fun for maybe a couple of nights. After that, you are ready to no longer be in a tent. After that, you are ready to be in a house. So, could you imagine living in a tent? Would you not yearn for the day in which you get a better residence? Well, that's exactly like us right now. By leaving us here in these, God has sent you and I on a camping trip. There are two reasons why anyone lives in a tent. And number one is obviously poverty. Or number two, one lives in a tent because they're on the move. Probably for a job, always on the move. And either way, it's not ideal. And either way, it is hopefully temporary. Too many Christians fall into one of two wrong categories. Either, number one, they love their current tent too much. They are too at home in it. Or number two, yes, they yearn in their weak body. They yearn and they look forward to losing it, which is good, but they don't really look forward to their new body like they should. What I mean is they can't wait to cast this off, but they're not conscious at all of the new body that is coming to them. While the children of Israel were wandering in the wilderness, the ark was kept in a tent-like structure called the tabernacle. One purpose of the tabernacle was that it could be mobile. Why? Because they were not settled. And because they were not settled, it was always meant to be temporary. Once they conquered the land, that's when the time came for the temple to be built. And once it was, the glory of the tabernacle that they had known paled in comparison to the glory of the temple. So also, the ark of God's presence is in us. But right now, you and I are wandering. Right now, we are camping. These bodies are like tents. These bodies are like the tabernacle. Right now, God has, as Paul just stated recently, placed his treasure into earthen vessels, cheap clay pots. But don't be satisfied with these earthly tabernacles, because one day these earthly tabernacles will be replaced with a heavenly permanent temple that will out-magnify what we have right now 1,000,000-fold. Our new bodies are described to us as being, quote, a house not made with hands. Now that phrase, made without hands, it has the idea of it's made directly by God without going through any natural channel. In other words, not of this world. Now, obviously, our current bodies were not made literally with hands, but they were formed naturally, these bodies of ours, while our new bodies will be made supernaturally. Mark 14:58. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. Colossians 2:11. In whom also ye are circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, in putting off the body of the sins of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ. Hebrews 9:11. But Christ, being come and high priest of good things to come, by a greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, which is to say, not of this building. Although our new bodies are going to be tangible, like Christ when he rose again from the dead. You could touch him. But they will not be of this world. They will be created supernaturally by God, meaning no starting small and slowly, gradually growing up. Nope, full size instantly. Our new bodies will be tuned in to heaven's frequency, which is why we'll be able to see God through our physical eyes. Look at verses 2 through 4. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed, we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon, that mortality might be swallowed up of life. So Christians who die before the rapture, they will get to see Christ. And that, as Paul's going to say, is the most important thing. However, they will be naked. They will be naked and look forward to not being naked nonetheless. Right now, God desires for our, quote, groaning to cause us to not only look forward to leaving these bodies, becoming disembodied spirits or souls and going home to heaven, but also to looking forward to the new bodies that Christ has purchased for us with his blood. Psalm 17, verse 15. As for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. Ultimately, we won't be 100% satisfied until that glorious day in which we, quote, awake with his likeness. Number 2, the next body fulfills God's purpose. Verse 5, now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit. God's ultimate purpose in salvation is not justification, but glorification. Therefore, God will not be satisfied until you are glorified. The reason you are saved is to glorify God. And God will ultimately be glorified once you have been translated into his likeness. It was God's plan since eternity past for all who would be saved to receive a glorified body. That is God's end game. Romans 8:29. For whom he did foreknow, he also did predestinate to be conformed to the image of his Son. The names written in the Lamb's book of life are written there in order to ultimately be glorified. And the justification that we experience in the meanwhile is just a middleman. It's just a means to an end. He that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God. Meaning, God has destined it to be so. It has been his plan from the get-go. Not only will you be happy with your new body, but what is more important is this: that will be the day God has been most looking forward to. And so since that's the day God has been most looking forward to, it ought to be the day we are most looking forward to. Christians should look forward to that because God's glory is our highest purpose. Number 3, we will be with the Lord in verses 6 through 8. In the meantime, if we die, yes, we will be naked without a body. Yes, God's purpose will not yet be fully fulfilled. Yes, we will still look forward to the resurrection day. But we will already have the most important thing. We will be with the Lord. Verse 8, we are confident, I say, and willing rather, to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Paul says here these two little words, willing rather, meaning better to be without a body and with Jesus than to be in a body but down here. By saying, quote, willing rather, Paul is saying that being with Christ is the most important thing. As the Apostle Paul walked to the chopping block to be beheaded, perhaps he thought to himself, man, I thought I might make it to the rapture. Man, I thought I might never be unclothed. Man, I thought maybe, just maybe, I would never ever be bodiless. But that's okay, because I am willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. Are you looking forward with confidence to the day of your death, and looking forward to every day before that day, but also looking forward to your last day? So, folks, think about heaven. Think about heaven like crazy. Sing songs about heaven. Sing them like crazy. But most of all, live every day in light of your future with God by serving God and living your life for God to its fullest, right here and right now. As we sing a hymn of invitation, I invite you tonight, if you would say in your heart before God, God, I want to look forward to heaven as my motivation to live my life as fully for you as I can between here and there. I want for my looking forward to going home and my meeting Christ to be the very fuel in my gas tank that causes me to serve you every day until then. As we stand to our feet and sing this hymn of invitation together tonight, as God has spoken to your heart, come forward and kneel at this altar.